What's up guys, I'm Sega Lord X, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the Beats of Rage engine for the Sega Dreamcast. Now, when this engine very first came out, I paid it no mind at all. I mean, zero. It looked like a bunch of cobbled together elements from other games, and I just figured it wasn't worth my time. And as years would go on, there would be a ton of modifications for this engine. I mean, just about every theme you could think of would be thrown into it. So after some friends' recommendations, I finally sat down and gave this thing a try. And I was really glad that I did, because there are some good experiences with this engine. Modifications have come a long way, refinements have really added to the overall experience. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to go over some of the games that I own, or some of the games that I've tried, and we're going to talk a little bit about the quality of them, how they look, let you guys see some gameplay, and hopefully you can figure out whether or not the Beats of Rage engine might be something you're interested in. Let's take a look. Beats of Rage was originally a project to pay homage to the Streets of Rage series of games by a group called Senile team. It was released in 2004 for the PC, then ported over to multiple systems including the Sega Dreamcast. This is where I'd encounter it for the very first time, a 2D fighter done in the mold of Streets of Rage 2, using SNK characters as both heroes and villains. It was animated great and the music tracks fit the setting, and the co-op multiplayer was solid. Although I enjoyed the effort, I didn't care much for the gameplay of the characters. It just didn't feel like a complete Streets of Rage experience. You couldn't deny the appeal though. Beat-em-ups were all but dead by then, with Sega abandoning the genre years before. It gave people that had loved those games something to enjoy on a system that had been ripped from its owner's hands far too soon. Beats of Rage would see a few changes and various new versions after that. Beats of Rage Xtra would be a fitting upgrade to the first, this time including some characters I very much approved of. The gameplay was much more enjoyable and varied. I loved the addition of more movesets and special attacks, and the animation was just god awesome. The engine had really come together in this release, and I enjoyed it immensely. We'd see another version of the game released called Beats of Rage Remix, this time changing up the characters even more. I enjoyed this one as well, especially the new Street Fighter characters and their familiar moves. Once again, the game was animated incredibly well, with gameplay having solid hit detection and a great presentation. All these games had a few issues with repetition, with some stages being too long and some enemies taking way too much damage to kill. But the overall experience had been excellent for a homebrew game. Sprite and background mods would begin to hit the engine soon after its release, and we'd get some really good and weird additions. Megaman War of the Past would be the next experience with the engine for me. This one was a beat-em-up featuring the Blue Bomber, enemies from his games, as well as some good music tracks. The animation in this one wasn't quite as refined as the SNK characters, but it played well enough and even had a little story and cutscenes to go along with the quest. It was definitely another good showing for the engine, and got me excited for what else creative people might be working on. Nothing could have prepared me for the next game I'd play though. Road Rash Revolution is one of the strangest homebrew games I've ever played. It takes the graphics and music from the classic 16-bit Genesis game Road Rash and turns it into a freaking beat-em-up. No joke, you punch, grab, and kick while riding down the road. The music is faithful to the original game, and although I tired of it quickly, I found myself messing around with it again and again. It's a weird one for sure, with a great soundtrack. My next experience was straight up awesome though. Kill Ryu Volume 1 and 2 is one hell of a good mod. Featuring sprites and backgrounds from Capcom and SNK fighting games, this one pits our hero Ryu against an onslaught of bad guys. He's armed with some classic moves from the Street Fighter games, with everything set to some pretty good background music. The presentation is even backed up by a story with cutscenes. This one here is definitely one of the better playing mods for the engine, and one I recommend if you're looking to try it out. I'd then roll up on Hatchet Ninjaz, and boy is it another weird one. This one is set to a hip-hop theme, with a story filled with dialogue and cutscenes. These scenes are loaded with profanity and some controversial subject matter, so be warned should you be interested. It stars 4 characters who, according to the opening story, have a main objective to kill. Of course, some dude comes along and has to piss them off, and they ain't having it. The game looks great and has some decent music to fight to, but it's really hard. Certain enemies have some crazy reach advantages over you, and it gets pretty frustrating quickly. Still, it's a good one to mess around with if you can stomach the vulgarity. Next up for me was Hyper Final Fight 1 and 2. Exactly as the name implies, this is a direct recreation of the Final Fight arcade game, just a lot faster. And make no mistake, it's awesome too. Featuring a kick-ass soundtrack and new characters to fight as, this one's gameplay and presentation is spot on. It looks and feels exactly how you'd want to beat 'em up to be, and the additional characters really add some much needed depth to the overall experience. Even the stage layout and bosses are close to the arcade, making this one a must play if you enjoy any of these games at all. Hyper Final Fight 2 is a direct sequel to the first game, and it too is top shelf goodness for a mod. It has a few new characters itself, some new backdrops, and the same great gameplay of the first. It's another great beat 'em up for the engine, and as good as any standalone original console port out there. Both of these are great experiences and highly recommended. Next up would be Dragons of Rage, a wonderful weapons-based beat 'em up with a great soundtrack and some seriously good-looking sprite and animation work. The stages are overly long and there are some frustrating enemies here and there, but this is another great addition. Bosses are imposing and environmental dangers add some variety to help change the pace a bit. It's another one that gets hard, but these games are best played with friends anyway. Next would be one of my most anticipated releases for the engine, Aliens vs Predator Aftermath, a game based on the Capcom arcade beat 'em up that never came home. It's another winner too, with great animation and music from the original movie. Aliens flood the screen constantly, giving you that feeling of being overwhelmed that every Aliens game needs. Backdrops in the environment are perfectly presented as you battle in a rundown city and various other locales. It's as close as we get to a console version of the original arcade release, and an experience I definitely enjoyed. The next mod we'd get would be called Double Dragon Extreme, and as you guessed it, it's based on the original beat 'em up arcade series. It features the classic tunes from those games, the same settings, many of the same moves, and plays way better. Attacks connect better and have a larger variety of animations. It has multiple inspirations you can choose from, including Double Dragon 2 and Double Dragon X. These variations change settings, moves, music, and a number of other things. It's a damn solid package of throwback beat 'em up action. Definitely a must-see if you are a fan of the source material. Next up was another one I was excited for, Golden Axe Arcade Remake. This one is directly based on the original Sega classic Golden Axe, and does a surprisingly good job of recreating it. The music is there, the visuals are really close, and even the gameplay has a similar feeling. It isn't perfect and some of the hit detection can be frustrating, but it isn't bad at all. It's a type of game that makes you realize just how great an actual arcade compilation of Sega's classic games would have been for the Dreamcast. It certainly had the power to do them justice. My favorite mod for the engine would come with Rage of Streets, however. This Streets of Rage 2 remake looks and plays exceptional, with perfect music and gameplay that just keeps on giving. Backgrounds and animations are solid, as are sound effects and voices. It immediately summons those warm nostalgia feelings from the 16-bit era, and is one of the very best mods out there for the Beats of Rage experience. If you can try only one of these mods I've shown you here, this is the one you can't miss. Grab a friend, choose your fighter, and get ready to kick some serious ass. So there we go, guys, the Beats of Rage engine on the Sega Dreamcast. Now, there are a lot more modifications for the Beats of Rage engine than what I have shown you here. I mean, a lot more. So if you guys are actually interested in this kind of content, please let me know down in the comments, because I would love to cover more of the Dreamcast homebrew scene. There's a lot of stuff out there for the Dreamcast, believe it or not. People really have taken to putting other games on the machine or other engines on the machine or just creating content from the ground up for it. There's a lot of stuff out there to look at. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you next time.